As I mentioned before, we are a permanent supportive housing building. We are a site-based PSH, which the site-based part of it is obvious that we are one location as opposed to permanent supportive housing that is located scattered throughout the city in various units. So our Neighbors First program and our Neighbors First Family program, they work with a number of different individuals and families, but they're not all located in one building in one location. They're scattered kind of throughout the city in various locations under different landlords, et cetera, et cetera. So here we have all 40 men in one location. We have case managers on site. We have staff, as Carrie mentioned, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So there's always somebody in the building. And so what tends to happen with people that get placed here is that they tend to have higher needs. So the men that are here, we are not a medical facility, but as I said, we are 24/7. So we have the ability to kind of do wellness checks on people to make sure people are doing okay, to make sure that their needs are being met, to make sure that people are being seen every day, getting the food they need, et cetera, et cetera. So, anyway, because the guys have higher needs that are placed here at La Casa, this tends to be, and this isn't true completely across the board, but this tends to be a lot of folks' last stop. So this is kind of where people will get placed prior to either needing an even higher level of care sorry, I have the chat box open, so I'm looking at the chat, so I probably should close that. Anyway, so the men tend to come here, and then when they need a higher level of care, moving to a nursing home, or in some cases, if they don't need the level of care here, then they could move to a more independent living, even though we are independent living, but a scattered site, permanent supportive housing, which tends to not happen as often. And many of the guys, as I said, this is kind of the last placement that they end up coming to. And so we have had a number of residents over the last almost 6 years pass away here at La Casa, which is unfortunate, but also is good that the folks were here and in housing and didn't pass away on the street that they were housed. So we work a lot with all of the men that live here to ensure that they're getting the help and the support that they need. We are a housing first program, harm reduction model. So I mentioned before that I had done outreach in the past, and 20 years ago doing outreach in the city, it was this idea of kind of getting people housing ready. So people needed to be clean from substance abuse. They needed to be compliant with mental health medication. They needed to have their medical conditions under control, et cetera, prior to moving into a housing program. So what happened with the housing first model is basically that model kind of flipped upside down. And the idea now is that we house people, and then once people are stably housed, we work with them around their, lack of a better term, issues, substance abuse, mental health, medical conditions, et cetera, so that we can kind of work with folks to get them more stabilized so that they can kind of live their best life in housing and getting the help and the support that they need. And I won't go off on this, but I will just kind of mention this for a lot of the folks that are placed at La Casa. What we find is it's kind of a different subset of the homeless population in terms of folks that you have folks that have become homeless as a result of job loss, et cetera, and they kind of just need to kind of get back on their feet. What tends to happen with the folks that, and again, this is a vulnerable population and a high needs population, what tends to happen with the folks that get placed at La Casa is that they have a lot of needs and they end up here. And what we find is that a lot of the folks have been homeless for many, many years. And so living in an apartment, cooking, kind of all of these activities, the daily living that many of us take for granted, are not in the folks that come here. It's not even in their mind. So kind of working with them to kind of move beyond that, kind of what do you do on a daily basis? Like, you don't have to just have one set of clothes. You can have a couple pairs of pants. You can have a couple shirts. How do you cook? How do you eat? You don't have to eat carry out all the time. You don't have to, like, this is your place. You can stay here. You don't have to leave during the day. So kind of working with folks kind of around some of those issues that it wasn't their reality living on the street. So one of the questions in the chat, and I will answer it because I did see it. So the question was, do residents pay any rent? So the residents are required to pay 30% of their income, which is standard for DC Housing Authority. It's a standard kind of rent calculation for the District of Columbia. I think it's actually nationwide, but anyway, 30%. We actually do not charge people rent for living here at La Casa. So 30% is actually goes into an escrow account, which the men can then draw from their savings account. But the idea is that people can kind of learn the budgeting and kind of understand that if they do gain a higher level of independence, they could go to a permanent supportive housing, scattered site housing somewhere in the community, and they know that they can pay that 30% towards their rent because they've been paying the 30% while they've been living at La Casa. That also goes into our general population. So about, of the 40 men that live here, and this is totally off the top of my head, I believe we have 22 guys that actually have income. The other folks do not have any income at all. About 20% of our population that lives here at La Casa is undocumented. So their chances of getting any type of income, quote unquote, legal income is less possible. But anyone that is working or receiving any sort of income is asked to pay 30% of their income each month. Again, that goes into an escrow account. So I hope that answers your question. I'm happy to answer more in detail if that goes into it. Another question in the chat box is, can any of the men do workforce training with aim higher and then find work? Yes, we've had a number of men get connected with aim higher and work towards going into the workforce. Again, that is not the case for all of our guys, because some of the guys that many of the guys that we work with have severe mental illness, chronic substance abuse problems, chronic medical conditions, and are very vulnerable. That being said, if there are folks that are interested in working, by all means, we support and encourage them to connect with Aim Higher and to move forward to try to find work. Also knowing that employment not only is a ways to receive funds, but it's also socialization. It's also interconnectedness in the community and with people. And so I would say kind of moving a little bit towards talking about kind of these COVID times that we've been dealing with. I think that probably that has been one of the biggest things that we've been dealing with here at La Casa in terms of socialization and in terms of kind of this isolation period, because guys that were connected to day programs or connected to things outside or had friends and family coming to visit them, a lot of that has been cut off due to COVID for the health and safety of the men in the building. So very early on in terms of helping to support our residents, what we did is we limited the visitor policy into the visitors into the building. So we didn't want to have a number of people coming in and out of the building. So home health aides, mental health staff, et cetera, were allowed in the building, but we kind of cut off visitors early on for the health and safety of everybody in the building, residents and staff. And that policy is actually still in effect right now. We have made some exceptions for various reasons and for the health of the residents that we were working with, but to kind of figure out how we could maintain the health and safety of everybody here. So we initially put that in place, and then we have a number of buildings, a number of signs around the building that encourage all our residents and staff to be wearing masks in common areas of the building, and when leaving the building to go out into the community. We got some nice footprint signs the other day, so we have those on the floor around our front desk to encourage people to socially distance as they're talking with staff. We're not really doing one-on-one visits with our residents in the office space. We're doing that we have a community room upstairs, and we have space in the lobby and kind of outside of the office space, again, to socially distance and encourage mask usage. We've been doing, I think, a really good job with doing that. Early on, we adopted universal precautions. So we do have hand sanitizing stations around the building so that we can disinfect and wash our hands, and wearing the masks. And I feel like we've done a pretty good job. In late March, we had one of our residents tested positive for COVID, and then probably again about a month and a half ago at this point, we had another resident test positive. None of our staff has been tested positive or become sick during this entire time. So I think that's a great thing. And because of and by the way, both of the guys that did test positive have recovered, and they're both doing well. But it was clear that based on the timing, that they clearly did not infect each other. And none of the other men in the building were infected as well. So I feel like we did a good job in terms of stopping the spread within the building. I know early on the concern of staff was, well, once one person gets sick, everybody's going to get sick, and it's just going to be this downward spiral. So the fact that we've been able to kind of contain it and manage it throughout this, and as Carrie and JM both mentioned, closing the building isn't really an option. We are a 24/7 facility. So as everybody else kind of transitioned to working from home, that was not really an option for the staff at La Casa. So I let people know early on that we are essential employees. We will be expected to be at work, and we will do whatever we can to maintain the health and safety of the staff, and the staff has really stepped up and really done an amazing job during this time. And kudos goes out to all of them. I think that we've really been doing a good job in terms of being here all the time and meeting the needs of the men that live here at La Casa. So another question from the chat, looking to employment readiness to undocumented present special challenges. How could DC government make it easier? Yes, the short answer to that question is yes. Being undocumented does create some barriers in terms of finding employment. And could DC government do things to make it easier? Probably. I will actually defer on this question. This is a little bit out of my wheelhouse. I mean, again, we do have folks that, are seeking employment, but I would say a good majority of the guys that live here at La Casa are really dealing with a lot of chronic issues that prevents them from working. So JM, I saw you just unmuted. Do you want to mention something?
Yeah, just wanted to chime in. Generally, the city has been really very supportive of La Casa, of the men who live with us, and providing for the folks in some ways through different resources that are available for the folks who have no income, which is crucial. And the partnership with the city really has been a great one. I wanted to clarify that the reason why the money is going into escrow accounts is that this is a city building, and by law, the city simply is not allowed to collect rent in permanent supportive housing sites for formerly homeless folks or similar buildings. So we do collect the 30% because, as John said, it's helping people get into a good habit in case they do want to move on. And we've had a few people through the years who have moved on to more independent sites where they just lived in an apartment in a building with everybody else. The escrow account is very useful. You can imagine with the level of income that we're talking about that it doesn't go into, great amounts, but it's been useful for a number of men through the years who have needed to travel to see family across the country, for instance, or just needed special equipment, and there it is, the money is right there. So it's a good thing. Elsewhere in permanent supportive housing, where the rest of Kerry's cluster is, of course, the families and the individuals do pay to their landlords the 30% of their income. So that's how permanent supportive housing is set up all through the city. And then, of course, as John said, Housing First has been a complete revolution because we don't leave anybody behind now. And these highly vulnerable men, like the 40 men at La Casa, do get to come in and be cared for and have better lives. And it's the goal of, all this, the entire system in homeless services in the city. Kerry and I are going to sort of facilitate the Q&A. Maybe, Yolanda, we could unmute for a little bit if the sound quality is good enough to see if we have folks who would like to ask questions.
JM, I just had one more thing to add that I just wanted to make sure that I put out there so that I could thank everybody. But also kind of during COVID, we have had great community support. We have had some amazing people step up. They've been, because even though we are independent living and many of the men are able to kind of cook their own food and do things like that, we did have, or we have currently almost daily drop-offs of bagged lunches to our men, done by various volunteers and various groups that have kind of put things together. We also had a 10-week partnership that we hope to kind of continue to move forward with. But the French Embassy provided some amazing hot French meals to all of our guys on a weekly basis over a 10-week period during COVID, which was absolutely amazing. And the guys, they delivered it on Thursday night, and the guys were, waiting at the door, looking forward to receiving these meals. So, so kind of throughout this time, we've had a lot of great support, and we hope to kind of moving forward continue to build those relationships and kind of continue to encourage that. So, so I just wanted to mention that as I was kind of talking about COVID, but let's jump into the Q&A.
That's so important, yes, to be able to make it so that the men get good food with nutritional value and don't have to leave the building so much to be in line like the rest of us in supermarkets, because they are older in many cases and vulnerable in all the cases. And so it's been so important. And then you actually organized a food pantry at La Casa that has been filled with also good food, and so that there's plenty for people to eat during COVID, which is really great.
Yeah, most definitely, and that's been a way that we can kind of supplement it. Not necessarily meant to completely fulfill somebody's grocery needs, but it's able to kind of supplement and help people out that are kind of in a jam or don't have either the funds or aren't really capable of going out in the community, and kind of trying to encourage people to stay in as much as they can and provide those things to folks as they need it. So that's been huge.
I want to thank anybody on the call who has helped with that, because it's really tremendous and it's a lot of help and greatly needed. As you can tell, the team is doing a fantastic job, and at the same time, it's under a lot of stress due to the pandemic, and as it works to keep everybody safe in the building, staff and residents. We have a questions about pre-pandemic. How were volunteers involved in La Casa, and what about given what we're seeing?
Okay, so pre-pandemic, we had, and we hope to get back to this in the future once this pandemic passes us by. But we did have a number of volunteers coming in and kind of working with the men. We had a monthly game day or game night that folks would come in and kind of hang out with guys and play board games and card games. Again, kind of that socialization that I was talking about.
Excuse me.
Yoga class. We had, we were in the process of getting a really basic kind of cooking class off the ground. We had 2 different art classes for various levels for the guys that wanted to fulfill kind of their artistic needs. But again, kind of more kind of socialization activities, because there's not a requirement for the men to be involved in any of these, but wanted to kind of do things that were engaging and things that people wanted to be involved in. So that's kind of, we do hope to get back to that and kind of build upon that. But in this pandemic time, the best and really great thing has been the food, with the food bags and providing items for our pantry, et cetera, et cetera. So that's been a huge help.
Trying to see if there are other questions. You have done a lot of work at La Casa as a staff group to build relations in the neighborhood, which were really essential. Can you tell us a little bit about that, John?
Sure. As I mentioned earlier in the call, I also do live in the neighborhood, so I have been here for quite some time. So I do know not all of the key players, but I do know some of the key players. And early on in my time here at La Casa, I did meet the property manager next door and the building owner, and many of the restaurants, the managers and owners of their establishments, and kind of talked with them about kind of how we could work together, because sometimes our guys don't behave as well as we would like them to behave. And so, so rather than having the neighborhood get angry about somebody standing on the corner and shouting, I would rather them talk with me and let's see what we can do to kind of make this work. And, obviously maintaining the confidentiality of all of our residents here, but kind of doing my due diligence in terms of a social worker and an advocate for the community that we serve, talking about kind of, the effects of mental illness, the effects of substance abuse, the, long-term effects of chronic homelessness, chronic medical conditions, kind of how people's life circumstances has led them to where they are right now, and try to encourage folks to have a little bit more compassion and understanding for some of the issues that our guys are dealing with. And overall, I feel like it has worked quite well. That being said, as many of you know, Columbia Heights, Mount Pleasant, Adams Morgan is located in Ward 1. It has historically been a very ethnically, racially, socioeconomically diverse neighborhood. It is the most densely populated area in the city. So people are literally living on top of each other here in this neighborhood, which is often not the case for other parts of the city. In some ways, I do feel like Ward 1, Columbia Heights, is almost kind of like this petri dish of of kind of experiences and understanding, and so I love it. Again, it's one of the reasons that attracted me to live in this neighborhood, because I definitely felt like this is the way that we should all live. So here I am, and kind of just trying to kind of work with folks in the neighborhood to better understand kind of our population and kind of how we can all work together.
Thank you, John. There's a question in the chat box from Ann Michael. Are you able to incentivize or assist in any way efforts to deal with substance abuse or compliance with mental health treatment? So the harm reduction work that we do, would be good to go over.
Yeah, so it is harm reduction. It is working, and it's not easy, and there's not an easy answer for long-term substance abuse or non-compliance with mental health conditions, but it is a slow and steady process of kind of working with individuals to, again, help them to understand and see how their life can be better by maybe not necessarily, and just kind of using harm reduction techniques here, rather than, kind of talking about complete and total abstinence from all drugs and alcohol, looking at kind of, hey, I know you drink every single day, or I know you're using whatever, crack, heroin, marijuana, whatever, fill in the blank. Anyway, rather than using that every day, could you lessen that amount? And what would that look like? And how would your quality of life be different? And I will use an example here for a gentleman that we have currently living in our facility that has been struggling with substance abuse for many, many, many years. He was actually in a substance abuse treatment program when the pandemic first hit. And this is actually going to sound horrible in terms of harm reduction, but one of the things that he learned in being in this treatment program during the pandemic when they couldn't really gather as a group to do kind of these group interventions and AA and NA meetings, is they really relied on television. And so this gentleman had been out using for a large majority of his life, that he unfortunately never really quite experienced the joys of television watching. And so he really was able to kind of embrace this wonderful thing called the television, and that became one of his coping mechanisms, and one of the things that, rather than going out and using every day, hey, I can watch this, I can watch this television show, or I can watch this. And we talked to him. This was actually a different guy, but we were talking to him, and he said, well, I have to get home because, Dark Shadows is on, in the middle of the night. I was like, okay. So again, kind of using little things that are kind of a different way of doing things, and kind of taking one small step at a time to get to the bigger goal of total abstinence or complete med compliance with psychiatric meds, et cetera, but knowing that a lifetime of substance abuse or a lifetime of denial of mental health symptoms, we're not going to be able to kind of correct or change everything overnight, that this is a slow process. And by somebody being in housing and having a stable place to live, they are in a much better space, a much better condition to kind of work with and kind of manage some of these symptoms and behaviors, as opposed to, as I was saying before, kind of being on the street and kind of asking somebody to do the impossible. Hey, don't drink for 30 days and, don't use any drugs, and make sure you take your medication every single day, and I'll get you housing, which was kind of an impossible task 20 something years ago. So, JM?
Yeah, so it's so important. You can tell everybody on the call how, the programming has to be tailored to each person. You have to get really creative to see what might motivate somebody to make these small changes. And small changes are important in addiction recovery because they're the indication that the person is starting to reverse the power relationship the substance has on them. They're trying to pull at it and reduce the number of drinks or the frequency of use. And that's essential. And then, of course, at the core of the model is that regardless of what happens, regardless of what the person decides to do in the end, with all the support he's receiving, the housing never rides on that. We never say to somebody the way we did before in the abstinence model, if you continue to use, we can't vouch for your safety, and you're going to have to go to a 28-day program, first step usually, and then if that didn't work out, we might give a notice, and the person would have to exit, so they would be back on the streets. So we had in a way, we had completely defeated the process, the progress of this person. And the strength of this model, which came from New York, from Pathways, and there's a local Pathways that used to be affiliated with the New York Pathways, and spread through the country, is that we're not leaving anybody behind. We're meeting everybody where they are. And as a community, we realize that some people have challenges, and the system gets to treat everybody equally. When I used to train in dual recovery, I used to say that we never wonder what our neighbors do in the house next door or in the apartment next door if we live in a building, and why? Because they pay their own rent. And the system had it so that if you hope to have your rent paid by it, then you need it to be more perfect than other people. And then we realized that it just wasn't a good way to work, because we were leaving people on the street who would sometimes die due to hypothermia linked to alcohol, for instance, in consumption in the winter. So it's a huge progress we've made as a field. Do we have any last minute questions? We have about 10 minutes. Carrie, would you like to make some comments? How different is La Casa from the other apartments that you help run?
Yeah, I was actually gonna.
Out there for single people, right? Living on their own.
Yeah. So our Neighbors First Individuals program, we're under the same contract with the Department of Human Services as La Casa. So we're held to very similar modalities with our case management. What I was going to say to kind of piggyback off of what John and Jean-Michel were talking about is that the real benefit of this site-based model, especially when it comes to those vulnerabilities like substance use and mental health, is having the eyes on the residents every day 24-hour option. And so we are really able to visibly see if someone's decompensating, or maybe someone has all of a sudden started showing up back into the building stumbling and not really looking like themselves in their usual day-to-day presentation. And so the one really huge benefit and differential is that staffing component of the site-based program at La Casa. Um, and so it's able to allow John and his team to really hold on to the folks that need more attention and focus on them and really coordinate and collaborate with other city organizations like core service agencies, treatment centers like John was discussing, healthcare providers, because these gentlemen are quite vulnerable. All of them are, and that's why they're in the building. Whereas on our scattered site programming, like Neighbors First has, sometimes we don't necessarily see that day-to-day change, and maybe we get to them 2 weeks apart from visits or 2 weeks apart from one another, and you go back out after 2 weeks and you see like, wow, a lot has changed and we could have maybe caught it sooner and connected them with more assistance. So a lot of community partners call me, call Jean-Michel, call John to figure out how can we get our client into this building. He needs this assistance. And I mean, honestly, if there were more buildings like this in the district, I think we would have so much better supportive services that could meet the needs, especially as folks are aging. And I see the question about healthcare on site. That's a dream. We wish. We do not have healthcare on site. Currently, our contract is with the Department of Human Services, and they don't have that built into the contract. And we would worked with John's working and can describe some of the things that he's trying to do. But right now, we do have a Unity Healthcare clinic a block and a half away, which is
half a block.
Half a block. The gentlemen do go there. And sometimes the staff members even walking them there if we're uncertain that they're not going to make it. They might get intervened with on the street and get distracted, and that's part of permanent supportive housing and that wraparound support as well. Is that really hand holding is how I describe it. It's not literal, but it's that concept like we want to walk side by side with our participants in these programs and kind of guide them. But the ultimate goal is to get them in a place where they can make these choices on their own. But I'll let John talk more about health.
Yeah, I mean, as Carrie said, yeah, we don't have any site-based healthcare, but the Unity Clinic is half a block away from us, and we do walk people over there quite often. And because of our proximity and because of our relationship with some of the doctors over there, we have had nurses and doctors come to La Casa to see folks at our building. So even though it's not an official site-based care, due to our relationship building in the community, we've been able to do that on a case-by-case basis for some of the guys that are unwilling or unable to go. We do call EMS 911 quite often, so it's all of the paramedics in the neighborhood at the different fire stations know us. So they know many of our guys. Hey, who are we here to see today? What's going on? So I'll usually meet them at the door, brief them, let them know what's going on, and then we can deal with it pretty quickly. And in fact, we called 911 for one of our guys a couple months ago, and he specifically asked us, well, whatever you do, don't let him send engine 11, because apparently he had a problem with engine 11. So we had to ask for somebody else. But anyway, we definitely have a lot of coordination with those folks. And I do see another question in the chat. How is someone selected to live at La Casa? So La Casa is through coordinated entry in the district. So all of the folks that are seeking housing in the city complete a vulnerability index to determine what their need is and what their barriers to housing are. And so based on how vulnerable an individual is, and based on if there is actually a space at La Casa, which is not very often, but assuming that those stars all align, the person that is high on the vulnerability index that needs the level of care that La Casa is able to provide gets matched with La Casa, and then they move in here. As Carrie was saying about the city having more site-based PSH programs, that would be amazing. That is in the works. It's not happening as quickly as we all want to see it happening, but there are more site-based coming online. And I believe there's at least one site-based coming into the Walter Reed construction up the old Walter Reed facility. And I know they're building one a site-based facility over at all the grounds of old DC General Hospital. So there are buildings kind of popping up in the city that are going to accommodate that. So I think that's a huge step in the right direction. There's still not enough, and I don't know if there'll ever be enough, but there definitely is a very high needs population that benefits from a site-based PSH to be able to kind of deal with all of the ongoing issues and stuff that we have on a day-to-day basis. So
there's a question about there being a similar facility for women, and there's one I'm familiar with at N Street Village. It was developed a little bit before La Casa, an older building that was refurbished on 10th Street, I believe. So there is a building not too far, actually. And these locations are key because there are a lot of businesses, people who came to La Casa. Some of the men had their habits in the neighborhood already. A few had stayed at La Casa, even though some had moved on also. And then all the connections that can be made through supports like Upper Cardosa, the medical facility we were talking about, like Clínica del Pueblo, Neighbors Consejo. Locations for these programs are really key. So it's really important to have them all over the city and in the right places. We have about 3 minutes left. If there's burning question or comments, John, please.
I was just going to add one more thing, just in terms of I know a question that comes up often is people ask how permanent is permanent and kind of how long do people stay at La Casa, and I just wanted to kind of volunteer that information. So 55% of the men that live at La Casa have lived here since the building opened in December of 2014. And then 80% of the men that currently live here at La Casa have been here for 3 years or more. So, so we do not have a lot of turnover here. I realize that we're not a huge building, and 40 is plenty big in terms of the needs, but probably not big enough for all the people that actually need it. So, but we do have a fairly stable population here in terms of the men that live here. So I just wanted to put that out there if that was a question somebody had.
Thank you, John. Carrie, any closing remarks?
I just appreciate that everybody took the time out of their day to join us this afternoon. And definitely feel free to reach out to any of the three of us on here to ask if you are interested in learning more about how you can be involved with La Casa, whether it be through donating maybe brown bag lunches. If you want to try to do anything once COVID subsides, more safe. It was a facility where we were able to do done volunteer projects and group work in the past, and we hope one day that we will be able to get back there and invite more
We
groups
will.
into the building. So we welcome all of you once things are back to a more normal place. But in the meantime, just reach out if you do want to find a way to contribute in other ways.
Thank you, Carrie. I want to thank you, John, for presenting La Casa to us. You certainly made it come alive. So thank you so much. Thank you for your leadership at La Casa and for everything you do for the men there with the team. It's really wonderful work. And Carrie, thank you for your leadership and for being with us this afternoon. Yolanda, thanks for managing the call. You've done a great job. And I want to thank you all for being with us this afternoon also. Thank you for your support. You know, it means a lot to know that we have a whole community with us to serve the over 3,000 people we serve now every year at Friendship Place. So we look forward to having you on our next call in 3 weeks. And Chris Rutledge will be sending an email about that call very soon. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much. Take care.
Great
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. That was a terrific presentation.
Thank you.
I know I can get off at some point. Ay, ay, ay. There we go.